Nothing But the Truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengap of India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. This is my weekly X-ray of key issues that matter to you without holding back on the truth. The outcome of the recent general election in Bangladesh has produced a clear mandate. Now, this could prove to be a major turning point in India's troubled relations with Bangladesh. Because Tarique Rahman, the new Prime Minister, has a commanding majority, and with that comes government legitimacy, stability, and the political space to make and take tough decisions. So today, on this episode of Nothing But the Truth, we will analyze what Tarique Rahman's victory really means for India-Bangladesh ties, why relations collapsed so sharply over the past 18 months, what are the core disputes or concerns between the two countries, where the next big flashpoints will be, and what India must do to reset relations with Bangladesh and move towards a more positive win-win relationship with our neighbor. But before we answer these questions, a bit of background. For the past year and a half, after Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was ousted in August 2024, India-Bangladesh ties reached rock bottom. It's a country that India shares a 4,000-kilometer-long border, and if you see a map of the subcontinent, Bangladesh is literally sandwiched between West Bengal and India's northeastern states. To reach the 7 northeast states, India has to use this very narrow 25-kilometer wide Siliguri corridor that stretches for around 60 kilometers. Now, during Sheikh Hasina's reign, connectivity improved with Bangladesh allowing trade corridors across its territory. That cheapened logistics tremendously and improved two-way trade between India and Bangladesh. But after the fall, the new interim government throttled land trade between the two countries, and headed by the chief advisor, Muhammad Yunus, the Bangladesh government, the interim Bangladesh government, stalled all connectivity projects, and in retaliation, India tightened visa issuance. Worse, and this is where the real problem began, there were ugly flashes of communal tension, especially around Bangladeshi Hindus. Even cricket got dragged into politics, with Bangladesh withdrawing from the T20 World Cup. This was after the Indian Cricket Board asked the Kolkata Knight Riders to let go of talented Bangladesh all-rounder Mustafizur Rahman following an incident of communal violence against Hindus in Bangladesh. And there was also this very explosive problem of former Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina taking refuge in India, but she was then convicted by a tribunal in Bangladesh and faced a death sentence. Now, Dhaka then demanded her extradition, but of course Delhi refused, and the interim regime in Bangladesh went about using this to launch a full-scale anti-India campaign. Simultaneously, the new dispensation began tilting more openly towards China, pushing for Chinese-funded projects in strategically sensitive zones. It also restored relations, and I'm talking of the interim government headed by Muhammad Yunus, restored relations with Pakistan, the country that it split from in 1971 and gained independence. And the worry for India was that this triangular friendship between Pakistan, China, and Bangladesh was something that concerned the sensitive northeast border and India's security over there. Now, also Bangladesh's interim government was influenced by the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a pro-Pakistan Islamist party that in the past had fostered Muslim extremist groups to stir trouble in India, apart from supporting or the previous dispensations before the interim government and before Sheikh Hasina had also supported northeastern insurgent groups. For India, therefore, all this was the worst case regional cocktail. There was a hostile political mood next door, a harder border environment, and the danger of rising extremism in Bangladesh. Plus, China was gaining deeper strategic and economic foothold in a country that sits right at India's doorstep. In the context of all this, Tarique Rahman and his Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or BNP, winning a commanding majority is seen as a positive signal by India. A little bit about Tarique Rahman. At 60 years of age, Rahman steps into an office from a life shaped as much by inheritance as by disruption. Born on November 20th, 1965 in Dhaka, which was then part of East Pakistan, he is the elder son of Ziaur Rahman, the soldier president who was assassinated in 1981, a war hero who had ruled Bangladesh for a while, and Begum Khalida Zia, who later dominated national politics through 2 turbulent terms as prime minister. So his pedigree, his political pedigree, was unquestionable, and therefore, when it looked at some of the things that he went on to do, it didn't, of course, it was not politics first. After being educated at some of Dhaka's most elite institutions, Rahman actually moved into business. He established ventures in textiles and shipping, and it was only during Khalida's second tenure, which was between 2001 and 2006, Rahman had become very closely linked with the BNP. In fact, he had become indispensable. He cultivated student leaders, strengthened grassroots networks of the party, and developed a reputation for decisiveness. Now, when the BNP lost power and the military-backed caretaker government came in 2007 and launched an anti-corruption drive, Rahman was arrested and charged in multiple cases involving graft and abuse of power. By 2008, when Sheikh Hasina won the general election and became prime minister again, he left Bangladesh ostensibly for medical treatment and then remained in London in exile for 17 years before his return just before the general election, and he came back late last year. Now, Rahman lost his mother, Begum Khalida Zia, who passed away because of prolonged illness, and this was as soon as he came back. But then Rahman went on to lead the BNP, or the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, to a really massive mandate. The BNP, just to give you some figures, swept the elections, winning 212 out of 300 seats in the parliament. This gave it a 2/3 majority. And here's the most important part. This wasn't a vote for Islamic extremism, as many in India had feared, and of course internationally too. It was largely driven by the young voters, or the Gen Z voters, who had led the uprising in 2024 that ended Sheikh Hasina's 15-year rule. Now, Bangladesh youth clearly wanted jobs, they wanted merit to be the criteria for getting jobs, they wanted transparency, and they were tired of inflation and patronage politics. And when I spoke to Mahfouz Anam of the Daily Star, one of the most respected columnists and editor and publisher of the Daily Star, he told me that this election saved Bangladesh from these dangerous uncertainties. Of course, Tarique Rahman's victory is a moment that could reshape the entire trajectory of India-Bangladesh relations. India really has a narrow window to reset this relationship before events begin to harden it again. India did move swiftly. Prime Minister Narendra Modi called to congratulate Rahman for his victory even before he was sworn in, and talked of peace and prosperity in the region and how India would contribute to it. The Prime Minister then deputed Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla to attend his swearing-in ceremony in Dhaka. That was because the Prime Minister was busy with the AI summit that was being held in Delhi, where world leaders were coming in, and Prime Minister was to host them. But the big message that India was sending across by not only Prime Minister Modi speaking to Tarique Rahman, as well as Om Birla attending his swearing-in ceremony, was that India was ready to reset relations. Now let's answer all the hard questions that I had asked earlier, and let's begin with what is one of the biggest concern, or has been a big concern, and these go back to the bad old ways of fostering Islamic extremist groups that many Bangladesh regimes had indulged in before Sheikh Hasina came to power again in 2009. And these groups had become inimical to India, and also there was huge amount of support given to the Northeast insurgent groups, including those from Assam and other parts of the Northeast. And Bangladesh had become a safe haven for these groups. So Delhi is watching very closely because the last time the BNP ruled, as I'd mentioned, from 2001 to 2006, extremist groups had grown active. There were huge arms caches that were discovered, and northeast insurgent groups like the Ulfa had safe havens. Now, as I mentioned, under Sheikh Hasina, those networks were cracked down upon. And this is really one of the big concerns, the Islamist party, Jamaat-e-Islami, has won 68 seats, which are a substantial proportion of the votes as well, something like 31%. And this is its best ever showing. The last time it won only 18 seats, and this number, 68, is huge. And let's not also forget that most of their wins or most of their seats are the ones that border India. Now, that's what makes India uneasy, because these can then stir trouble, given the fact that they've always been antipathetic to India and has antipathy to India, also supports Pakistan, never reconciled to the fact that there was a split in Pakistan and Bangladesh was made independent, and their presence at the border makes the border more hostile in many senses unless they've changed their ways. So Tarique Rahman's test will be simple. Can he rein in the Jamaat and prevent Bangladeshi territory from being used against India? Many experts that I spoke to say that BNP 2.0 and Rahman 2.0 are vastly different entities than what they were 20 years ago. Rahman is really hard focused on neighborhood first, and the vote was not, as I said earlier, for extremism, but for speedy development. The Jamaat also has to be handled, and India's High Commissioner, Pranay Kumar Verma, did meet the Jamaat leadership soon after the elections, and this is a sign that India is engaging, not isolating the Jamaat. That's a good strategy, but let's not forget, engagement comes with expectations, and those expectations have to be met. The other big issue, the second big issue, is the illegal immigration of Bangladesh citizens and the border tensions caused by it. Now, of course, this is a perennial irritant. This is not necessarily something that has just happened recently. The issue predates Bangladesh itself. For, if you recall, before 1971, over decades, there has been migration that has altered demographies in parts of Assam, Tripura, and West Bengal, and particularly when the persecution of East Pakistanis at that time saw many of them flee and come across to these states. And this has caused, of course, tremendous disruption. If you noticed when the Assam elections is currently on, and that is one of the big issues of a lot of these migrants coming in and occupying their territory. In the Indian government, the Modi government has taken a very tough stand on that and has deported over 2,000 Bengali-speaking migrants who they believe to be of Bangladeshi origin, and this has triggered a backlash, as we've known. Now, meanwhile, Bangladesh accuses India's border security force of strong-arm tactics and border killings. This is emotional territory for both sides. And Tarique Rahman has promised to address the border killings issue during his campaign, election campaign. So how he handles this will matter enormously to India, because this is a constant irritant. India has a very firm stand that all Bangladesh illegal immigrants have to go back, and there has been a movement towards that. And yet, at the same time, the rule of law has to be followed to ensure that only the right people go back and there is no targeting of certain communities for this purpose. And that is the big question that human rights activists have been asking, that let there be a fair process of it. So that is something that we have to look at, because Bangladesh also has to watch out. They just can't keep sending migrants across the border and hoping that India would take them in, even when we, particularly states in Assam and others, find great difficulty in managing their affairs. Now, of course, the other concern for India is the safety of the Hindu minority population in Bangladesh that form 8% of Bangladesh's 170 million population. That's the latest census of it, but could be a little less, a little more. Now, in the early days of the interim regime, headed by Mohammad Yunus, law and order had totally collapsed in parts of Bangladesh. India expressed concern over attacks on Hindus that were reportedly more than 2,000, and these were communal incidents which also saw temples being vandalized. Of course, the interim regime denied those numbers and said they were far, far less, and they had protected the Hindus. But the issue simmered and then came to head with the lynching of Dipu Chandra Das. He was a Hindu garment worker in one of the districts in Bangladesh, and he was killed, lynched, after there were massive protests over the killing of a prominent student leader, Sharif Osman Hadi, and this was in December, and demonstrations were held against the Indian High Commission in Dhaka, and this saw cricket even getting caught in the crossfire. As I mentioned earlier, the Board of Control for Cricket in India asked the Kolkata Knight Riders, or the KKRs, to release Tarique Rahman from the IPL squad. Bangladesh then withdrew from the T20 World Cup, which is ongoing, and India was co-hosting it. And then, of course, relations hit a low point, which was not seen in decades. But Tarique Rahman, in his first address to the nation, said something significant, and I'm just paraphrasing him. He said, "This country belongs to all of us, regardless of religion or caste or language." And then he went on to appoint Nitai Roy Chowdhury, considered a very respected Hindu leader, as Minister of Cultural Affairs. That's a big signal. Tarique Rahman has made it clear that he would like to ensure that everybody gets a fair deal, even those that didn't vote for him, those that do not belong to the majority communities, and that's a good signal. But signals must turn into stability, and India will be watching on what exactly Tarique Rahman does in ensuring that law and order prevails and the minorities are not targeted. Now let's move to something that could flare up really very soon, and that's the tension between India and Bangladesh over river water sharing. Now, Bangladesh and India share 54 transboundary rivers, but two of them matter most politically: the Ganga, which is called Padma in Bangladesh, and the Teesta River. Now, when it comes to the Teesta River, there was a temporary arrangement in 1983, but no permanent treaty. There was a bit of a water sharing agreement at that time. But Bangladesh said they wanted more. And in 2011, a breakthrough seemed possible during the Manmohan Singh regime. They had almost agreed on everything, but at the last minute, West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee opposed it, arguing that her state faced water scarcity and that she could not make such a deal, and that collapsed efforts to get one on the Teesta rivers. Of course, a growing cause of concern is that in recent years, China has offered to fund a massive Teesta management project, which has rattled India. And the BNP manifesto also promises a fair share of Teesta water. So this summer, when river levels drop, emotions may rise again. India's current mood reportedly favors joint conservation and management rather than a zero-sum percentage fight, and that might be a way forward. Of course, when it comes to the Ganga, or Padma as it is called in Bangladesh, the 1996 Ganga Water Treaty between the two countries is up for renewal this year. This is actually an opportunity. Renewing it quickly would give Rahman an early diplomatic win and show that also India is favorable towards a settlement, and this kind of cooperation can work. This could be the first confidence-building measure in the new era, in the Tarique Rahman era that has just come about. There are also other concerns that we can quickly talk about, and one of them is the warming of ties with Pakistan when the interim government was there. Remember, for many, many decades, Bangladesh and Pakistan had no relations with each other, barring during certain regimes. But after the interim government came in, headed by Mohammad Yunus, there have been a flurry of meetings between the two countries, and add to it, there has been the electoral resurgence of what I mentioned earlier, the Jamaat-e-Islami, which supported Pakistan in 1971, and therefore India's concerns deepen. But let's be clear, geopolitics today is not 1971. Bangladesh wants leverage, India wants stability. The key question is, can Dhaka pursue balanced diplomacy without becoming part of a China-Pakistan strategic triangle? That is India's big concern. But early words from Tarique Rahman shows that he's well aware of these considerations, and he was very careful when he was asked about Bangladesh's relations with China at a press conference. He said he would treat all relations with merit and see whether it helps Bangladesh, and therefore suggesting he understands the high stakes and India's concerns. Let us see how that develops. And finally, and let's deal with what is the elephant in the room, Sheikh Hasina. Once Bangladesh's dominant leader, she now lives somewhere in Delhi. That's what we are told. And she has been convicted by Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal and sentenced to death. Now, Bangladesh wants her extradition. India says the trial lacked due process and would want to see a fair enunciation of the law, and she remains in India's protection. Now, the problem has been for Bangladesh that she has continued speaking publicly against every regime from the Indian soil. That is deeply uncomfortable, especially for the new BNP government. And so India's dilemma is complex. Extradite Sheikh Hasina, and that would set a precedent it historically avoids, especially when she is facing capital punishment. And let's not forget that we have also sheltered the Dalai Lama, much to China's angst. And of course, India also points out that Tarique Rahman was in London for 17 years, though Sheikh Hasina had demanded her extradition, his extradition, and the British government didn't oblige. So there have been precedents, and India says there has. And of course, India says, let the due process of law be there and let there be a fair trial, and India would consider Bangladesh's request for extradition. Of course, also, the flip side is, does India allow her unrestricted activism using our soil, and thereby risk damaging ties with an elected government in Bangladesh? So, what is the likely path? And here experts come in and say, quiet restraint, limit overt political activity, frame her stay as humanitarian, Sheikh Hasina's stay as humanitarian, and try and avoid escalation. And so, for now, the BNP leaders seem willing to move forward without making extradition of Sheikh Hasina a precondition. They said it will not impact relations with India, but this issue will simmer. Meanwhile, the real challenge for Rahman is how he will handle Bangladesh's fragile economy. That's going to be his big focus, because inflation is currently around 9%. GDP growth has slowed to roughly 3.7%, far, far below the 6% plus growth that Bangladesh enjoyed for years, especially under Sheikh Hasina. The government debt has ballooned, private investment is down, youth unemployment is the most politically explosive issue of all, as we've seen. And even though official statistics show that unemployment looks low, underemployment, particularly among graduates, is high. Young people want stable, merit-based jobs. That is what they voted for. The 2024 uprising, remember, wasn't just ideological, it was largely economic. Now, therefore, Tarique Rahman faces a dual challenge. The first is to control inflation fast enough to calm households because they're already angry about it. And the second is to create credible jobs quickly, enough to retain the faith of the youth. Remember, it was they who rebelled and ousted Sheikh Hasina, and he's well aware of the consequences. Also, if Rahman doesn't succeed, the Jamaat's popularity might start going up, and that could be inimical to India's interests. So here's where India can help. India funded infrastructure in Sri Lanka during its crisis. Remember, they had a similar revolt over there, and India stepped in and gave a lot of money to the new regime to build up infrastructure. And this is something it can do with Bangladesh in terms of restoring stalled projects and also providing the kind of infrastructure projects that could boost the economy. India can also expand its two-way trade that it has with it and make sure that Bangladesh stays far more engaged than what it has done in the past year or so. It can offer credit lines, as it has done in the past, and joint manufacturing zones, build up connectivity, and therefore, economic cooperation could become the backbone of this big reset that India could plan with Bangladesh. Now, if these move in the right direction, South Asia will stabilize. If they don't, mistrust will deepen. That's something we don't want. So, but for now, and let's be very clear, after years of friction, both sides seem to be choosing engagement over escalation. And in diplomacy, sometimes that is the biggest step of all. Tarique Rahman, to sum up, Tarique Rahman's election presents a new opportunity for both India and Bangladesh to start afresh and take relations to greater heights in the future, in the near future, and away from the dismal lows of the recent past. That's the big opportunity. For an in-depth report on the subject, do read the cover story that I wrote jointly with my colleague Arkamai Datta Mazumdar, who was in Dhaka during the elections and provided an excellent ground report. Thank you for being with me in this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing but the truth.